All right, while you're taking attendance, I just want to give you a heads up about next class on Thursday. We're scheduled to have what we call the Man-Tunes Workshop, which is that big project that you're assigned to do of analyzing a song. We're going to go over that whole project and what's kind of required and how to do it and everything next class on Thursday. So if you're thinking about skipping next class, don't do it. Come to the class, okay? It'll really benefit you greatly to understand what that whole project's about and what's required, okay? Any questions about any kind of housekeeping items at all? All right. Okay, we'll leave this up for another maybe half a minute. How are we doing here? Good. Okay. All right, I think we've got everybody here, so we're going to close this down. All right. Oh, jeez.
So we're having a little bit of projector challenges today. We'll have to just deal with the one screen
I could put it all on just that one side and view the whole thing, because this is cutting it off.
Yeah, it does cut it off. Okay, you're right. So let's switch. Well, we're going to continue with our conversation about what we've called necessary conditions for paternal care. And you might recall we've covered two of them already. Paternity confidence. And anybody remember the second one? I don't. I have no clue. What was the second one?
No. Well, we started with paternity confidence.
What is the second one?
But then we ran into this problem, right?
We ran into this problem. That's right. Which is that we see species in which paternity confidence is low, and yet we see some evidence of paternal care, right? And that begins to remind us, hopefully, of that second condition. It reminds us also that paternity certainty or confidence is not the end-all, is not the only condition. It is not a sufficient condition, as we would say, for the existence of paternal care. Because, yes, it tends to be high in species where there is a high amount of paternity confidence, but then there are these other species where there is low paternity confidence, and yet we still see some evidence of paternal care in quite a number of these species. So that therefore means that there's something else going on, right? There must be something in addition or other than just paternity confidence that helps us to explain, from an evolutionary standpoint, the existence of paternal care in these species.
And that's when we reminded you that, okay, remember, Trivers pointed out there's at least two minimal conditions. You had to have paternity confidence for males to invest, right? But then you also had to show there had to be some kind of fitness benefit to that male. It had to improve the survival or reproduction of their offspring, which in turn then enhances the male's own fitness. So those were those two conditions that we explored last time, and we found, remember at the end of last lecture, that, in some species, the father carrying the infant really either added survival to that infant, maybe kept him warm, or actually helped the mother in terms of energy, relieving her of that energetic burden, and then she could pump out more babies. Right? So those are two minimal conditions where you see, okay, if a male is going to invest, he's got to have pretty good paternity confidence, and it's got to have some kind of a fitness payoff.
Yeah, we just want to be really clear about this because I understand that it can be confusing when we say it enhances the father's fitness, but then we say, well, the kids survive better and they themselves go on to leave kids, or the mom makes more kids. You might say, well, how does that enhance the father's fitness? Well, think again about what fitness is. Fitness is always a measure of the amount of offspring you can produce. It's about
the genes that you can.
Well, that's
not just offspring, but
well, obviously offspring that share your genes. So you're getting more of your genes into the subsequent generations, right? And that, of course, means that the carriers of your genes, your kids, have to also survive long enough to go on and reproduce themselves. Otherwise, if they don't, then it doesn't matter. So survival and reproduction is a measure of fitness, right? But it's survival and reproduction of your reproductive units, of your offspring, basically, right? Because that's the measure. And so if your reproductive partner in a monogamous relationship, if the female that you're mating with in some other relationship, if what you do for her causes her to produce more of your kids, that's also raising your fitness, right? Because it's the same measure. It's more of your kids, more of your genes getting into the next generations, right? So hopefully everybody understands how both by helping mom, right, in some fashion, which is translated into more kids, or by helping your kids directly, which of course makes them survive and reproduce. That's all enhancing the father's fitness. And it's enhancing their fitness too. It also enhances the kids' fitness. It also enhances mom's fitness, right? So it's almost like a shared fitness interest. But the father's fitness certainly is raised.
Because all we're trying to do, remember, is explain, why is this male helping out? Why is he carrying the baby? There's so many species, right? 95% of the mammalian species don't do that. And so what are the conditions that makes him want to, or evolution has shaped his biology and psychology to want to help, to want to carry that little bundle of joy most of the time? It's because he's pretty certain that it's his, and so investing in that little guy is going to enhance his fitness, and what he's doing actually helps enhance his fitness too. So what we want to do now is also turn to those other strange critters. When we looked back at this chart, remember we said, well, why is it that in monogamous species you should see paternal care? Because if they're monogamous, then the father has high paternity confidence. But then we saw the gibbons where he did nothing. And that's where we figured out, well, it's not just paternity confidence. It has to make a difference. And mama gibbons can do kind of fine without him. So that's why we don't see it there. But what about this big question mark? These are these multi-male, multi-female groups. Well, we talked about, there could be promiscuous mating in these multi-male, multi-female groups. What about their paternity confidence? You think, well, why do they show any kind of paternal care? Their paternity confidence must be pretty low if there's lots of males around and a female's an estrus and she might mate with multiple males maybe. So this is also a big question mark. How this doesn't make sense. So we want to go through some examples of these species to show you, well, actually it still does make sense.
Yeah, and just as we're talking about this, think a little bit about how a male could enhance his paternity confidence. So there are multiple males that are mating with that same female that you're mating with. That's not good in a sense from the standpoint of paternity confidence. But are there other ways in which the male might still be sure that some of those kids are his, right? And then that could then still lead him to provide some kind of paternal care.
And I think Trivers even pointed out to some of those, right? Here's some hints. Additional conditions following is that fathers often are able to recognize their own offspring.
Does that make sense? Right? So it may be that multiple males are mating with that one female, right? And so a bunch of those kids are not going to be your kids, or some of those, maybe none of those kids are yours. But if you have a way as a male to reliably, and this is an important part, reliably recognize your own kids in that bunch, that have been produced by that female, then and you give paternal care to that kid, then it's sort of a way of circumventing paternal confidence that you lose because multiple males are mating with that female, right? You're kind of notching that paternal confidence up a little bit because you're able to recognize your own kids.
Right, it's like a paternity confidence boost. So here, let's go through this example. This is, these are baboons. I think these are yellow baboons, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a male right here. Let me point to this guy. Here's this big male.
Is that our picture? That might be.
No, it's not.
It's not. Okay.
Here's this big male.
Looks familiar.
And there's this little kid right here sitting in his lap. This is a little juvenile baboon, right? And then there's this other juvenile baboon that's just picking on him. He's like grabbing him and screaming at him, and he's just bullying him around. And you look at this guy next, and this is the big male, and he turns and he starts threatening that little. He does this threat. You know how? Here, do the threat for him. That's what he does. He slaps the ground. He flips his eyelids. He, flashes his eyelids, which are white on top, so it's, attention.
And the hair raises.
That's right. And he's protecting this little critter, right? He's totally protecting him from this harassment. Well, these researchers followed all these male baboons. They live in multi-male, multi-female groups. A female, when she's in estrus, she has that huge sexual swelling. Remember that we talked about before, those big red butts that swell up? She's advertising, I'm in estrus, come mate with me. Okay, that's what the big swellings are. So you're going to have multiple males that are potentially mating with her. So you would think paternity confidence would be really bad. But when they looked at these males and they said, well, why is this male protecting this little kid? Why should, and he only does this to some of the kids and not to other kids, right? And through genetic analysis, you could take genes either from their hair or sometimes from feces. They figured out that males only do this behavior for their own genetic offspring. Okay? Their own genetic offspring. They don't do it for anyone else. How does he know that? How does he know that's his kid? We actually don't know. At first they thought, well, he was hanging around the mom all the time and was mating with her a lot. And so, he kind of figured it was his kid. Actually, that's not the case. They looked at that as well. He's figured out some way of identifying his own offspring.
That's right. So we still don't know by what mechanism or by what means, you might say, he's able to do it. It could be some visual cue, okay? It could be a smell cue, an odor cue. That's another possibility. When we turn to human kin recognition, human offspring recognition, which we will a little bit later in the class, we'll discuss those mechanisms, those means by which humans recognize their own offspring. So we know these from, of course, many other mammals. We know that these mechanisms, what we call kin recognition mechanisms, exist. They have evolved, right, particular sensory modalities and cues, so that there is a reliability about these. You can literally sniff out, in many mammals, they can literally sniff out individuals that are close genetic kin.
Mm-hmm. And you could see there'd be a big advantage to that, because then all of a sudden, as we see in this example, if we look at those necessary conditions, number one, does he have any paternity confidence? Well, actually, yeah, he boosted his paternity confidence because he has kin recognition. He knows who, he can recognize which are his offspring. So check, he's got pretty good kin recognition. What about, does it enhance father's fitness? That was that second condition. Well, we know that fathers that protect those little kids can get really hassled. They could really get bullied by, there's kind of high-ranking youngsters, and they could just be incessant in their bullying. So by protecting them from that kind of bullying, they're less stressed and probably have a higher survival. Right? So far we see that these two conditions are being met, even in those species where you have what seems like promiscuous mating. This is a clever way of getting around that paternity confidence, is kin recognition, recognizing
And
them.
you might have thought that bullying only happened in schoolyards in the West or in the United States. See, it also happens in the schoolyards of savanna baboons.
It definitely does.
And the males don't like it. The dads don't like it. They get in there and say, stop it.
And then that little guy saying, my dad's bigger than your dad.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But so it's helping out the offspring. Now, in this particular study, we don't know just exactly how down the road it benefits the offspring.
Yeah, this is what they suspect, is that we know that bullying causes stress, and so this is reducing stress.
Yeah,
right.
And they do it for their daughters and their sons. And for daughters, for females, stress is particularly bad in the sense that it interferes with reproductive functioning, might delay reproductive functioning. So it's a likely pathway, that is, if the dads are helping, especially their daughters, it's a likely pathway to them having improved reproductive function.
Mm-hmm. So let's turn to another one of those species that's on that list of multi-male, multi-female groups where you would think there would be low paternity confidence. This is another kind of baboon.
In southern Africa.
Yeah, these are in southern Africa, and we see kind of something interesting here. It's not so much that they see that the males are protecting little ones, but the males are allowing little guys to forage next to them. And that's, usually males, remember, they're big. They're twice as big as females. They're definitely the boss around, and you don't forage anywhere near them. Whatever food is near them, you just don't touch it. Don't go anywhere near there. But for some reason, some little guys are allowed to forage nearby. He doesn't kick them out. He allows them to be nearby.
And again, that means they're less likely to be stressed out by others, right? Because if you're a little guy, you might easily be displaced, be pushed out of the way if there's a desired food resource right there. Another male might come along and push you aside, and you don't get to eat as much. But if you can feed next to a big male, he allows you to do that. Likely you get better food quality and
less displacement. Yeah, exactly.
And less stress.
Yeah. So when they did genetic analysis, only the little guys, only these little tykes that are his babies does he allow to forage nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Again, some evidence of kin recognition. We don't know how yet. We need you to figure that out. We haven't figured it out yet. How do they recognize their own babies? We don't know. I mean, they're equally cute. I can't figure out. I would think they're just the cutest little things ever, little baboons. So again, this is just to summarize what we know so far. First of all, the degree of evolutionary relatedness does not predict the degree of paternal care. Remember we said that we were going to look at the great apes, especially chimpanzees, that share like 98% of our genes, but it doesn't necessarily mean they behave exactly the same way that we do. That should make sense because remember we talked about adaptations are adaptations to solve challenges in the environment. And if they're in a different kind of environment than we are, then they are solving challenges in their environment. Maybe using a lot of the same genes and the gene, products, but it doesn't mean we're going to behave exactly the same.
That's right. The conditions that are predicted from evolutionary theory that we've been talking about, these conditions here, cut across all species. They cut across, that's the beauty of it. So when you're doing the kind of cross-species comparison, that includes humans, of course, as we'll see, these conditions are meant to apply to all of them, and that's kind of what we've been testing out, right? Because if it turns out that there are exceptions, like in virtue of being very closely related to humans, then you'd have to alter the theory. But that's not the case here, as we've seen.
Yeah, so your genetic relatedness is not a factor here. But these other two things are really what the factors are. What is your degree of paternity confidence? If a male has a pretty high degree of paternity confidence, then they're likely to invest. But also, it has to enhance the father's fitness. It has to make a benefit to either his offspring survive better, or because he carries the babies, then the mom starts producing more babies. There's got to be a fitness payoff. So those are the two things so far.
But wait, There's more.
That's right.
There's always more. Okay, but not too much more. So we're going to bring in a third condition with an example. And it's something that we'll visit again as we go forward in the course with lots more examples. But we want to talk about this concept of mating opportunities, right? Because a lot of a male's ability, maybe all of a male's ability to leave more offspring is constrained by the number of available females, as you can imagine, right? If there aren't very many available females, or females willing to mate with the male, then he may have this unlimited capacity to make more offspring, but if there aren't very many females willing to mate or available, it's not going to matter very much. So in other words, the degree to which he perceives to have an opportunity to mate with females, right, could push him to, if he's already mated, even in a monogamous situation, it could push him to engage less in paternal care, kind of do less on that side for offspring he's already produced, and seek extra matings, basically. Invest some energy in extra matings because there are available females out there. So that's another sort of theoretical prediction about a condition, mating opportunity, that could push males either towards more paternal care or away from or delivering less paternal care, making that kind of trade-off, as we're saying, with extra pair matings.
So let's go through an example so you understand, what do we mean by this mating opportunity as this third necessary condition?
Consider the fairy martin. This is a good example, and often we use bird examples, as you might have noted, because parental care is fairly high in most birds, and that's in this case because most birds mate monogamously. They're pair living, they're certainly socially monogamous, but through genetic studies we also know that even though most birds mate or live monogamously, male and female pairs, there's often cheating going on. There are what we call extra pair copulations. We know this from lots of genetic studies. So one can then ask this question, under what conditions, when you have mated pairs like this, these monogamous male-female pairs, under what conditions might the male or the female be willing to stray? What are the conditions for males, let's say, in particular, to seek out other copulations?
So let's just paint the picture of what this world looks like. These are birdies, they're lovebirds, right? They mate, they live as a monogamous unit, okay, like most birds, as Dieter said, but they live in this colony. And in this colony, there's all these little mated pairs, and they make these little nests, kind of these cliff-type...
cliff dwellers.
Cliff dwellers, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so there's these kind of blobs of nests all along these cliffs, right? It's a particularly good location.
Kind of like the barn swallows.
Right, yeah. Yeah, anyone like golondrinas?
There you go.
Do you know what golondrinas are? Or barn swallows. You get them around here. They kind of make these little mud nests under the roof, and so you might get several of them in one place. Well, that's the case with these fairy martins, you know, a big colony of all of these monogamous pairs, okay? And they breed at different times. So at one time, you're going to have a pair that doesn't have eggs, another pair might have chicks, another pair might be, you know, incubating eggs. They're all at different times in this colony. Now, males are heavily involved in the incubation, right? They share, just like you see in many birds. Mom sits on the eggs for a while, and the male goes and feeds, and then he comes, and they trade places. He sits on the eggs to incubate them, and then she goes and feeds. It's biparental. There's a lot of shared parenting in birds, okay?
And we know from other studies that that's important. This biparental care is important because if both aren't doing it, if the whole job falls to the mom, let's say, then there's decreased survival, decreased hatching of these eggs.
So dad is really important. Now what they found is that how much time a male helps out by incubating, it varies by colony. And they thought, well, wait a minute, I thought these were, in one colony, males invest a lot. They're spending just as much time as moms on the eggs. They're really investing. But you go to another colony, and they're spending a lot less time on the eggs. What's going on? This is paternal care, but it varies. So we're trying to understand that. And it has to do with this last factor.
Well,
first of all, okay, paternity confidence, yeah, they're monogamous. Pretty sure those are his, right? What about, is it going to make a fitness difference? You pointed out that yes, if when mom and dad are contributing both, then those eggs do better. So what else is going on? Why is there low paternal care here?
So the nice thing about these kinds of studies is that the scientists made a prediction based on theory that we just described for you about mating opportunity. They said, well, the prediction here is that in those colonies where males are making less of an investment in incubation and helping at the nest, as it were, we predict that there are more available females. There are more mating opportunities for the males in that colony compared to other colonies where males are making a higher investment. There are fewer mating opportunities. That was the prediction that was made.
And let me just explain that when we mean mating opportunities, higher mating opportunities means that he's going out and trying to find more females to inseminate. If there's low mating opportunities, there's not a lot of free-floating females, he's going to pay attention to his own mate and his own brood and really invest at home, so to speak. Okay?
Yeah, so the point here is that he's not sitting on another female's eggs. He's not providing paternal care with another female. What he's trading is a mating opportunity, just a copulation, basically, sperm delivery, for spending time sitting or feeding his own chicks, okay? Likewise, everybody's cheating. It's, because there have to be females that are willing to cheat too. So when he's off cheating, she may be being visited by one of those males that's cheating in quotes, sort of a moralistic way of looking at it, right? Who's also not giving any paternal care to the eggs, but he's just mating with the female, right? So there's also something else going on that has to do with, getting more sperm.
So that
right?
then the mating, confidence, the paternity confidence goes down unless you can identify. You can recognize your own kin, right? Yeah. So there's always this kind of
So we also should point out that extra pair copulations are not frequent. They don't happen a lot, okay? Because if it was rampant, then you probably have almost no paternal care because there would be
no paternity confidence,
right? And so few males would spend a lot of time sitting on the eggs, incubating them, and then even helping to feed the young. They just wouldn't do it. So, but we know from actual observations that yes, you get these extra pair copulations, but they're not frequent. They're infrequent. Okay, and so that allows the system to not sort of get out of whack.
So we're trying to figure out, well, why is it that, okay, the fairy martins, they generally are investing in their offspring, but you get these differences. One colony does a lot, and another colony still does it, but does it a little bit less. We're trying to figure that out, and so this is what they found. Pretty interesting.
So we got two graphs here. On the bottom are females. That is, the bottom graph represents the proportion of fertile females, as you can see there, from low to high.
So this is low number of extra females, and then high extra females.
The amount of incubating that those females do with regard to their own eggs. And you can see that those lines, those are for different birds, female birds. There's really no clear pattern, which is to say that I think you'd agree that it doesn't matter for a given female how many other fertile females are in the vicinity or in the colony in terms of how much incubation she does. Her incubation time is not affected by the number of fertile females in that colony, right? I think you'd agree that's what that graph shows. But if you go up to the top graph, this is for a male. This is for the males, right? You can see it's quite different. The pattern and the average is indicated by the solid black line, that dark black line. the average goes down, just as predicted by theory here, right? The average, the more or the higher the proportion of fertile females in the colony, the less any male is going to incubate or spend time incubating his own brood. So that is a direct test, I hope you'll agree, of this mating opportunity hypothesis. It was predicted that it would turn out this way, and it does. So males regulate this sort of trade-off between, should I invest in other females, mating with other females, or put all my energy into helping to rear my own brood, and how much they do one or the other. That trade-off depends on how many mating opportunities there are in the colony.
Right. So now, all of a sudden, monogamy is not so clear what that does, right? Well, you could be monogamous and have high paternity confidence, and you may even be able to show that it makes a fitness difference, but you could be monogamous and have a lot of extra pair, a lot of extra mating opportunities available around you, and that may be of more interest to a male to invest in producing more babies than just investing in the babies that they have. Do you see what I mean? It's like a trade-off. A male has limited amount of energy in its life, and the highest fitness strategy may be to produce many, many babies and not really invest in many of them, or just to produce a few and invest a lot in them. And so that really depends on, do you have lots of available females or not? Okay? They're just different. Remember, throw morality out the window. That is not what we're talking about here. We're just talking about what is the fitness strategy here, okay? Not what is right or wrong in terms of social mores.
Well, that's right, because there is no, we would say, inherent moral compass or within nature. As humans, of course, we do have systems of morality, and we're not saying chuck those out the window too, because they matter to us. They regulate how we live together in social groups and the commitments we make to each other. So we're certainly not saying throw out moral systems here. But as far as the laws of nature are concerned, we can also see how sometimes these laws of nature might butt up against even the sort of moral attitudes that we have. In fact, it's quite interesting when you think of it in this way, this more biologically oriented way, and we'll talk about this more too down the road, that often the things we feel most passionately about are the ones that are at stake from a natural standpoint, the things that are threatened, like cheating, right? So we have very passionate moral attitudes about these things, because...
Oh man, male jealousy?
Right, because
female jealousy?
Because we know it can happen under the right circumstances. It does happen, right? So it's quite interesting how this works out.
Yeah, makes
so
sense.
We're not saying throw morality out the window. That's if we did,
true.
We couldn't have a human society. It's highly important. But we were just trying to give you a sense here of what is produced by natural selection alone, right? Darwin playing with testicles, as I call it. This is what happens over evolutionary time. And these are the three factors then. Hopefully you kind of understand now how these three factors, often in combination, will determine how much a male allocates his lifetime energy towards parenting or towards reproduction, making more copies of himself.
So these three things that you're going to know them by the, you're going to see these three factors, these three necessary conditions in your sleep, I guarantee you.
You will wake up in a cold sweat.
Like screaming these three factors, I'm sure you will. But you'll see them over and over again. And the reason why is we're getting these rules of the game from looking across species. But remember, we're still trying to understand our own species. And so we need these rules of the game. So now when you look at this new idea of, well, you can live in a monogamous, a mating system, but if you're living kind of in a colony, that has pressures to lead to paternal care or to lead away from paternal care, to lead to males wanting to invest or males more interested in investing in mating with other females. So think of our little TT monkey here. Remember we talked about them, a little monogamous pair. And they don't live like these fairy martens. They live in distinct territories separated from any other pair, right? So we saw they had high paternity confidence. We saw that males helping out really, it does make a fitness difference, right? And there's low mating opportunity. There's no other females around.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of paternal investment. It makes perfect sense. TT monkeys are like the poster monkey of our paternal investment, right?
Well, and they're often, as you say, not just spatially segregated that way in a rainforest, you know, but they also are vigilant about protecting their own territory. You know, so, and both males and females participate in protecting their own territory. So you can imagine that mating opportunities outside the pair are pretty limited.
That's right. A male is out there and saying, hey, no other males around. And the female's out there going, don't you even think about coming next to my male. Right? So they're very, very vigilant about their territory. So they make perfect sense. Now we want you to think about humans.
But 1 second.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to say, and the folks who study the behavior of these critters have actually shown that, in fact, that's the case. You don't get extra pair copulations.
Through the genetic analysis.
Exactly.
Right.
So it fits the model just beautifully.
Right. So TT monkeys are little poster species for the 3 necessary conditions for paternal care. But this is kind of a new idea of living monogamously, but living in a group of monogamous pairs. And that introduces this idea of, mating opportunity might be different for for one colony versus another colony, just like we saw in the fairy martens. So we want you to think about, humans might be thought of like a fairy marten case. We're monogamous, we make a big, huge fitness difference, but there's this third thing that there might be different mating opportunity in different settings, right? So that's just something that we want to throw out there, and we'll come back to understanding the variation that we see in paternal care in humans, in trying to understand why in some humans there is a lot of investment in kids, and in other groups of humans there's investment but maybe in a different way, okay, or maybe less investment. It doesn't mean that there's any human society where males don't invest at all. Okay, that's not true. But understanding that variation, just like we saw in the fairy marten, if you think of us as kind of a monogamous, generally a pair-bonded species, we'll get into even variations of that because you have harem societies too. But trying to really understand this, we have a lot of variability within humans, and we have to figure it out. So right now we have, though, our 3 nice, necessary conditions that we can use and utilize to understand paternal care across species, right? The degree, if you know these 3 things, you can probably predict how much fathering behavior you will see in any species. Isn't that cool? If you know anything about their paternity confidence, how confident are they that they're their kids? Do they have kin recognition mechanisms? If you know anything about that, that's one thing you need to know. The second thing that you need to know is, does it enhance the father's fitness in some way to invest in that little kid? Does it help the kid survive? Or maybe by carrying the kid, the mom does better and could produce more kids? This is all enhancing this male's fitness. And then the third thing is, well, what are his mating opportunities? Does he have plenty of opportunities to go make more babies with other females? Or are there limited mating opportunities? And so that's really pushing him to invest more in paternal care, invest in these babies.
Yeah, and even the cost, because the cost of reducing your paternal care for your own brood, maybe the cost is too high. For some species, it could be that straying and putting time in, even seeking more copulations, really exerts a very high cost that doesn't justify the trade-off.
True. Your babies could die. The ones that you produce could die if you don't give enough care. So these are the three balls that are always going to be in part of this juggling act of a male figuring out, should I invest in my offspring, right? Not consciously, but evolutionarily, under what conditions do males invest?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why I was making that point, because that second point about enhancing the father's fitness, right, isn't just making more copies of yourself, by mating, seeking additional mating opportunities. You certainly may. But if those copies, those resulting offspring, have very poor survival, especially the ones that you just made, that you've just deserted for a time to, in order to seek more matings, then that's a bad trade-off, right? If you make more copies but they don't survive to reproductive age, then you've actually decreased your fitness rather than enhanced it. So that's why we always have to think about these three conditions, even in interaction, right? In this case, fitness, enhancing fitness, and mating opportunities, right? So it's never real simple, but it's a powerful framework for really beginning to understand very specific kinds of examples in nature, including us. We're kind of one of these examples of paternal care, and understanding the amount that we give, when we give it, the type that we give. We can use this framework, as you'll see, for understanding that. And that's the beauty of doing this cross-species comparison.
So this is the slide that you will see in your nightmares, right? Okay,
well,
over and over
hopefully
again.
there won't be nightmares.
Hopefully not
Maybe
nightmares,
there'll be pleasant dreams, you know.
That's right. Okay, so the other thing we wanted to cover in this unit on Primate Pops is, well, we did cover number one, what are the conditions that lead to paternal care, those three conditions. But then we were trying to ask, well, what aspects, if any, of human paternal care are unique? Is there anything, so we see this pattern across all these species, these three necessary conditions. Well, are humans different in any way, or are we just, just like every other species? What's going on in the human condition?
Well, I think the case we've been making, right, as we'll see, is that the conditions are the same. The same conditions are going to drive human paternal care as well, right? So we're pretty clear on that, right. The ones that we've identified.
So here's a nice I love this picture because it shows a human family here, and kind of parenting going on, and also a little monkey family here, and
nice
parenting
Photoshop.
going on. Yeah, no, not Photoshop.
That's actually a real one.
It was an award-winning photograph.
I think it's in India.
In one
Is it
year,
India?
I remember. I think so. Yeah.
I think it's India. Yeah.
So is anything about humans special when it comes to paternal care? Well, we already saw this slide. I mean, just being a primate, primates as an order are pretty interesting. They're their package of having all of these traits: slow growing, slow reproducing, super long lived, really big brain. That is the package of being a human. And as we said before, that's the package of being a primate. Humans are the uber primate, right? We are really big brained. We are really slow growing. We have a long reproduction. Everything is the uber version of primates.
And so all of that is to say that it's particularly a heavy burden for humans to rear offspring, right? It's an expensive investment. That's what that's saying, because it's something you have to provide, as we've said, a high amount of energy because of the large brain over a long period of time because of the slow development. So it's expensive to do that.
But we can also say that those three necessary conditions, those conditions do apply to humans too. We are another primate species, and you can see that males won't invest unless those three necessary conditions are met. Now, how those conditions are met, how do you get paternity confidence? Does it come through monogamy, or does it come through kin recognition? Those are things that vary, right? So we'll have the same word. The reasons or the functions for paternal care might be a little bit different. And therefore, if the reasons for paternal care, like, in TT monkey, or what were we saying, the siamangs, the male was really needed to carry that infant because the mother just really didn't have the energy, can't physically carry that infant and nurse at the same time. That energetic reason was a big function of this paternal care.
Yeah. What you have to do as a dad, in other words, to enhance your fitness, right, is going to vary between different species because the jobs are different.
Right.
It takes different kinds of investment for the kids your kids to grow up successfully and go on to reproduce themselves. That's just, it should be clear, because there are differences, as we've just said, among primates, amongst all species, in terms of how long they develop, and brain sizes, what they need to learn, all kinds of things, right? So even though these conditions, overall conditions, still apply, there's sort of the rules of the game within that, right? Just exactly what kind of fathering services you provide and how you provide them and how much of them you provide, that's what's going to vary.
Right, and that's going to depend on, well, what do you need to successfully raise these kids? And in humans, right, to have that fitness payoff. In humans, you have very energy-demanding brains to grow. You have this long development. You need socialization and teaching of those offspring. These are all things that a male can contribute to. It will make a big fitness difference. So because you have that differences in the function, we have these really interesting functions that male care provides. It's not just keeping the kid warm. We have other functions that males provide. The teaching part, right? The protection. A whole bunch of functions that males provide. Then that's going to lead to different kinds of behavior.
And amounts.
Right? And the different amounts of paternal care. Exactly. So we definitely show a lot of direct care. We show a lot of indirect care. And when we compare them in those different domains, if we now look at all the species that we've covered so far, and we talked about how some have low amounts of care, almost no care, like our orangutan friends, and others that have high amounts of care, like our TT friends, and some in the middle, like our mountain gorilla friends, where would you put humans on this chart? Low, medium, or high? You'd still, now you see that they are high, and we can kind of compare them across the other species that we've seen, right? They're high, both in terms of the variety of kinds of behavior, of paternal behavior, of fathering behavior, but also in the amount, okay? But the rules of the game are still the same. You still have to have those same necessary conditions, those 3 necessary conditions. Just like you have to have them for the TT monkey, you have to have them for humans.
So one of the things that you'll see that comes out of this is we're going to see some variation in the amount and kinds. So overall, let's just say, overall, as we've just said, human males, compared to other primates and really other mammals, generally show a large amount of paternal care, heavy paternal care investment, basically, okay? Overall, that's the case. But we're also going to see that when you look across different societies, there's some variation in the amount and the kinds of paternal care that are shown. And this is where those same 3 principles, those conditions that we talked about, will help us to understand the variation, because it could be that in some societies there's lower paternity certainty, right? It could be that it doesn't make as much of a difference in terms of the offspring's fitness, or it could be that very high mating opportunities exist, right? So those are things that we'll come back to as we compare paternal care, the variation in paternal care across human societies.
And that's what we mean by this graph, is that we're going to look at the variation. We see that humans show that they satisfy those 3 necessary conditions. When you see paternal care, it's because it satisfies those 3 necessary conditions. We see that they show a high amount, but even within humans, just within humans, you're going to see a variability. Some societies are going to show a lot more, and other societies are going to show less. And we are going to come back to understand that difference when we talk about different cultures, okay? Right. So we now have the foundations. You now have the basic rules of the game here about when males should show fathering behavior. When do you see paternal care, caring for offspring, okay? So we're going to give you a discussion right now, but obviously there's no time left, right? The class ends at 11:50, right?
12:15.
I always do this.
I know. And you were rushing me.
I was rushing you.
Under the table, you were pinching me and kicking me.
I was.
and getting me to
I'm
hurry
so
up, and I'm
sorry.
thinking,
I'm
why are you doing
You
this?
should say that. You should remind me, say, sweetheart, the class ends at 12:15.
Sweetheart, the class ends at 12:15.
Oh, well, we have plenty of time for discussion. That's great, because we want you to think about this discussion. I really like doing discussion in class, so you can talk and get your thoughts down here. I don't like to assign it, but sometimes we have to. But I want you to consider this question. Given the existence of monogamous family units within a larger social network of other such family units in our own society, right? So we have monogamous family units within a group of monogamous, within a group.
Communities.
Yeah. We live exactly.
Think of suburbia.
Yeah. And we're talking about here in the U.S., right? That's not true everywhere, but just we're talking about here. We want, what's the question of other such families? Okay. Is mating opportunity a large or small influence on paternal care? Now, unpack that. I know that's going to take a few minutes to unpack that. And you can unpack what that question is. What does it mean? Does mating opportunity have an influence on paternal care in the community around you right now? Think about that. You think better when you talk it out with your buddy next to you. So do that first, and then we'll post it.
Does anybody still confused about the question itself? Because we can talk to you about it if you're not sure what we're asking. Just raise your hand and I'll come over and explain it for you. No? Okay. Seems clear then? That's why we're walking around. If you're not sure what it is that's being asked, let us know. Yeah. So in a minute, we're going to go over a couple of responses just to kind of get a spot check on how the answers are coming out. Your hand up. Yeah, take your time answering this. No rush. Got plenty of time. That's talking a lot. Do you want to offer up an...